Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mindful Educator Podcast. I'm so excited to have Dr. Kyla Smith joining me today. Hi, Dr. Kyla.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Dr. Kyla is a Perth-based, now we get this right, paediatric dietitian, and
Correct.
you also have mealtimes, which is like your program that you do. Is that correct?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Mealtimes is like my online kind of service, and
Yeah.
it's like having a dietitian in your pocket kind of thing.
Love that. Love
Yeah.
that so much. And we're going to get to that really soon. And I know
Uh-huh.
that you've obviously done lots of work. I think you've been doing this for like something like 20 years or something, working with families and
Yes,
children.
spot on.
Yeah. And you're also a mum of two yourself.
Yeah.
So love that as well. So thank you so much for coming on. I thought, do you want to tell us firstly a little bit about kind of how you got into this and yeah, just what comes up from there?
It's funny, I have to give a lecture this week at our local uni about kind of career paths and private practice. And so I've actually been reflecting on that this week because when I
Oh,
left school, I wanted to be a dietitian, but I also thought that I wanted to be a hospital dietitian. I wanted to work with old people. And that was my like real interest. And then I got that job and I was like, oh, I don't really like this. So what am I going to do? Yeah, and I worked in early in my career in a pediatric hospital and I worked with kids and I was doing some really cool, fun stuff. So I was doing a lot of the weight management kind of clinics. I was doing a lot of fussy eating and feeding clinics. I moved into kind of more of a community role and working with lots of families over a long period of time with kids who find eating really tough. So they have
mm,
a limited number of foods. They are really stressed and overwhelmed by food and meal times and eating, and it's very stressful for families and all sorts of things going on. So I was working in that space, and I also had a kind of side hustle where I was doing some of this kind of weight concern work, and that was a good 15 years ago now, and things have absolutely incredibly changed in that space, which is a great thing. It
yeah.
was quite problematic for a time, and that's where my PhD work was in weight management and thinking about how are we working with these families and are we actually doing them a disservice with the types of
Mm.
advice that we are providing, the kind of typical standard things that are happening. And so then it got to a point where I had my children and I was going to write a book about how we could feed kids in a way that helped us and helped them and really supported them in the long term, like not just in those immediate childhood years, but into their future. And that evolved into what is now the Mealtimes membership, which is actually more of an online interactive, watch the videos, ask the questions, read a little bit and watch a little bit and come back to it. And really like a support for families, doing the everyday life. It's not something you sit down and read once, it's something you keep kind of coming back
Mm.
to or checking in with, realigning, thinking about what do I want for my kids, for my family, for them, as they're growing up, how can I look after them, help them to be healthy, but also not become consumed by, the thoughts about food and all the things that go on. All
Mm.
those thoughts that are running through your head
Yeah, which
when
so
you're
many of us
feeding your
adults
kids.
struggle
Oh,
with. Yes.
100%. And that's a lot
Yeah.
of what that stemmed from is like, how can we give, I mean, for me personally, how can I do things a bit differently for my kids so that
Mm.
they actually don't spend a huge chunk of their life trying to control or change their body, that they're not wasting all this kind of precious time
Yeah.
doing things that just do not serve them in the long run.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I love that. And I
and
love
so
the
that's where
fact
we are
that,
today.
yeah, and I love the fact you got a membership that, yeah, I know, like, obviously the book, yeah, amazing. That would have been a great goal. But the fact that you've now got this and you can actually update it on the spot, ever evolving, because we know how quickly things are changing. And, like,
100%.
and I guess this is a question for you as well, because we're throwing so much information as parents. Like,
So much.
there's just, like, it's a minefield.
Yeah.
So how do we like how do you know what's real, what's not? Like how do you decide for yourself whether what you're feeding your child's actually the right thing when you're getting so much conflicting advice from everyone? Because it's a hard one.
It is wild. And I think this is one of the reasons, like particularly in this era of chat GPT or AI
Mm.
kind of things, you can ask a question and get 60 different answers
Yeah.
to your question, all of which kind of sound logical. And so that's the kind of part where you can't necessarily unpick all this stuff. And I don't think that you should have to as a parent. Like if your background is not in biochemistry and nutrition science and all of the things that, it's taken me decades to understand and interpret and be able to apply. Like, that's just not your job to have to do. And so, what I think is really helpful, and this has worked for me in my parenting journey as well, is to find someone or some group that you align with and that feels good for your family, that doesn't actually add a lot of guilt or pressure or you feel like you're crumbling under the weight of. Like I want some parenting support, I want some guidance, but I don't want to feel like I'm doing a terrible job all the time either. So
Yeah.
I found those kind of different people along the way who really resonate, and I go to them as my kind of source of truth. And I think you're allowed to change that. Things evolve or they change, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the difficulty is having, 50 people telling you something different, and then you're just end up doing nothing. You're stuck because
Yeah.
it's just so hard. It feels
Yeah. You
really
kind of,
confusing.
yeah, too much overwhelm that you just go, nah, shutting down. I don't know what I'm doing here.
It's funny because when I started the Mealtimes membership, I really felt like there wasn't enough information for people. It was really hard. And so that was kind of
Mm,
a couple of years before COVID. And then in the COVID era, we really saw like that influx of information. People were
mm,
accessing a lot more from home. So I think the pendulum has really swung the other way in
yeah.
terms of like it is just everywhere. You don't know where to turn. And so
Yeah.
I think actually narrowing your focus where you get your information from is a helpful
Yeah.
way of doing things.
Oh, that's good to know because I know for myself as well, like you try and do what you think is right for your
Mhm.
family, as you said, and then you think you're doing the right thing, and then you read something, you're like, oh, well, it's got this ingredient in it, which apparently has been linked to this, this,
Yeah.
and this, and you're just like, oh my
This
gosh.
is like my core, like bread and butter work in the membership is members coming in and being like, I've just seen this thing about
Yeah.
wraps. Is this true? And we're
Yeah.
like, no, that's just fear mongering. Like, actually,
Yeah.
when you look at your kid and this thing and what this looks like, you are totally fine. They're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But what about I saw
Yeah.
that this is an unhelpful. It's a lot of that really undoing because unfortunately those fear-based messages, they worm their way into your
Mm,
brain, they sink in, you stop scrolling when you see something that frightens you about, maybe you're not doing it right. I think
yeah.
there's also a really big misnomer that there is a way to do it that is correct with feeding, with toileting, with
Yeah.
life, with supporting kids with their body image, all of that. And I disagree. I think there's a way for your family, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same way as your friend, your neighbor, whoever.
Yeah.
You can actually find a way that works for your family.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that reassurance as well, because I know that it's not just me. I know a lot of people listening will be like, oh, yeah.
And honestly, that comes up a lot. Like, but what about this fruit's got more sugar? Or what about like the
Mm,
fiber? Like, those things are so like the sprinkles on the top of the cake. They are so irrelevant in the
yeah.
scheme of things. Like the core stuff that you do most of the time in your house. And that might be things like eating together, not talking badly about food, just sharing meals, modeling what you eat. Those things are the powerful things. The
Yeah.
actual teeny tiny which brand, which this, just in the scheme of things, just so not a problem.
Yeah. And so with that, like what is the importance of doing things like sitting down and having a meal together? What have you found kind of other benefits for doing those sorts of things within a family, within a household? Um,
Yeah. The eating together stuff has quite a lot of evidence behind it. I know that it's really tricky for lots of families, for lots of different phases of life. I know tonight we've got, school, we've got netball training, we've got to meet dad there, we've got to get here, like all the things. And it's not always easy to kind of do, but we know from a kind of research point of view that family meals are associated with better academic outcomes, lower risk of eating disorders, lower risk of mental health conditions. Some really kind of big things.
mm,
That doesn't mean that like sitting down together equals this.
yeah.
What it means though is that when you have a space that is fairly predictable, there's somewhere you can come, there's a space kind of carved out for conversation, there's a space carved out for modeling what families eat, is
Mm,
really helpful for kids. And you might have a child that does not thrive in a family mealtime environment, and that's okay. Like, there are absolutely nuance to this. It doesn't have to be like this nuclear family sitting down, everyone smiling, having a great time eating salad. I don't think that is real either. But I do think when you can have an adult and a child, and it may not be all the time or everyone together, but when kids see what adults are doing with food, how they're cutting it up, how they're eating, what they're eating, those things are really setting a norm for that kid for what meal times are like for their life.
Yeah.
And so you will, they might go through teenagehood and really rebel against things. But if you were to ask them, like, what is a dinner? They will tell you what a dinner is based on what they've had in their family for, years and years and years. And so
Yeah.
even when it feels like everyone's refusing it or not eating it or unhappy, it is still having an important role for those kids.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I know for me, personally and in our family, we've got the fussy eating. It is a thing.
100%. How old are your
And
kids?
so I've got three, so they're 8, 10, and 12. So
Mhm.
this is, we've had the battles from day dot, still ongoing. And I know I'm not alone because I know a lot of my friends that I speak with, there's some varying degree of the fussiness, the pickiness, whatever it might be. So how do we navigate this, especially as they're getting older as well? Like I know with the toddlers, there's always a lot more support around like the beige diet or whatever it might be. But as we get older, there's not so much support there. It's almost like
Yeah.
expected to have grown out of this, whereas I know that's not the case. So how do we navigate that?
And I think if you think about adults in your life, there are absolutely those who find food challenging for whatever reason. There are
Mm,
kids, older kids, young adults who find textures tricky or are bothered by vegetables or feel like the taste is really, over the top. They're not into that kind of spicy stuff. And maybe they will outgrow it over time, maybe they won't. But part of our job is really about supporting them to be able to have a go if and when they want to,
yeah.
without them feeling like we're always watching or pushing them into something. And that gets
Mm,
really tricky when you're starting to think like, oh, you might have a school camp. Like, what are you going to eat on a school camp if I was to send you off on this? Or like, what are you going to
yeah.
do at a friend's house if you stay over and they're having something for dinner that you can't eat? And that's probably something that your kids, if they are fussy eaters, do think about. And as a
Mm,
kid, I remember that experience, going to other people's houses and thinking like, I don't like that and I can't eat it. And, that's a big part of actually, is that a motivation to them to change for some point? And often it can be as they start to get more of a rational brain. Some
yeah.
of my favorite work, like I've had a lot of time in kind of clinics and homes, and I've worked with a lot of teams who kind of do some feeding therapy kind of stuff with kids and young teens are so fun to work with because they often have a bit of motivation. Like they do want to be a bit more like their friends, they do want to fit in, but it also is like years and years of saying, I don't like that, I don't want it, I don't, and
Mm,
having a struggle. And so being able to help them through that process of like how they teach their body and their brain to have a go at it and be calm and work through those kind of sensations is actually it's super cool to watch. It's not something a parent can do because
yeah.
there is so much just shared experience and worry and pressure. And so the best thing that parents can do is keep having food available as part of meal times, keep eating yours without trying to convince your child that it's really delicious. What you're on a kind of a green flag pathway is if they start to ask you things like, what is that? Or like, what's the
Mm,
sauce? Or have I had rice before? Or have I? And that just kind of really a bit of curiosity should be a sign to you that you're like, "Oh, we are not actually that far away here, as long as I can calm my farm and not jump straight into like, it's chicken curry and it's delicious. And you could have just a little bit. Like, I think you really like it. Because for all these kids who have found eating really tricky for a number of reasons,
yeah.
that is like a major, like,
Yeah. That's
no,
too much.
whoa, whoa, put the brakes on. I cannot kind of do this. And so one of the best things that you can do is the modeling without the pressure to get there and
Yeah.
without having a kind of time frame. I think if it causes a lot of stress, it is really worth, checking in with someone who does specialize in that area. Are there things you can do to support them? And
Yeah.
being involved in serving the food or being part of that is always helpful. But it is really long game stuff that you think is not
Mm,
paying off in the moment, but in the longer term you start to see. And I've absolutely experienced that. My oldest is a fairly textbook, very sensitive, very cautious, slow to warm kind of kid who can walk into the house and be like, "Have you been cooking with lemon?" I'm like, "What?" Like
mm.
I can't tell that or smell that or be able to even identify what it is. And she's like, bang. So, there's
Yeah.
no sneaking food into her or anything like that.
That was
And
me as a kid, yeah.
yeah, and
Now
then you
my husband's
identify.
like, how did she pick up on that? I'm like, well,
You could be on MasterChef, babe.
I know.
It's like.
This is my little special skill.
But so those kids need a lot of time. And she's,
Mm.
really only in kind of since she's been around 7, 8, been able to be like, those nachos, can I actually take the beans out of them? And I'm like, yeah. So she'll pick the beans out and be like, it's actually kind of good. And I'm, okay. But
Cool.
it's that real like, if you do or you don't, you're totally fine. I'm
Be the
not
whole
going to make
nonchalant,
you.
like, oh yeah, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Meanwhile, you're like kicking your partner under the table, like, oh my God, did you see that
yeah.
thing? But that is a really safe place. And my 5-year-old is still very much in the like, last night we had a dinner that is one of her favorites. And she told me, like, I've never liked this food before in my life. And I'm like, okay,
Okay.
sure.
So
Like,
even you're getting this. All right.
oh, 100%, because this is a part of childhood, like
Yeah.
for so many families. And the thing that is different, I think, is that this does not stress me out in the slightest because
Mm,
I know that I am doing the things that I can do. I can never make her be more adventurous. I can never make her bite, chew, and swallow something. I can never make her try it. It just never works. And I also just can't control
yeah.
exactly what she does with her body. But what I can control is like being able to take the time to sit down together where we can to eat, to serve up a
Mm,
variety of things, to be considerate of her. I know there's something on that plate that she can confidently eat if and when she wants to. Is really like having predictable meals. I know that we've had a break between afternoon tea and dinner, so she's not, full up from all those kind of things. They're
yeah.
the things I can control. I actually can't control what she puts in her mouth. And
Mm,
when I know I've done the things on my list, I can actually be kind of relaxed about it and trust that she will come out the other side at some point. And I'll just wait.
I love that. And I love how you've said things that you can control and things that you can't control because I think that's where so many of us are like probably getting it wrong in the sense that we are trying to control what they're putting in their mouth. Whereas if I suppose, yeah, we give them the options, they got the options in front of them, then they can make that choice. And I know for me, and especially when I was growing up, having that autonomy, having that choice was a big thing for me, which I never really got. So I try and make sure I've got that with my children. But as you said, like yeah, it's
And it's hard
definitely
when you're
good.
worried because I think a lot of the
Mm,
messaging we're getting around food now is like, Australian kids are not getting enough. This is not, we've got all these problems and it's like their behavior, or it's this. And so we are like panicked about vegetables or about protein or, this real worry underneath it all, which then is hard
yeah,
to be cool and calm about, which is so helpful for their eating when you like desperately, desperately want them to eat something.
yeah,
So that plays into it, I think. And I just don't think that helps anyone. So if we can
no.
dial it back a little
Yeah.
bit and think, okay, what can I actually do? How can I support? That's all you need to do.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. And I think I know that I'm not alone with a lot of people being like, oh, phew. It definitely helps. Yeah. So when you do work with different children and all the rest of it, I'm guessing there's actually some cases where perhaps there's physically something going on or whatever it might be. Like, have you come across that before that do contribute to these issues that people may have and then follow them into adulthood? And like, how do you navigate those
Yeah,
if they
100%.
are?
Yeah, and so that's what I mean is a big part of the work that I do as well is really thinking about what are these things that are making eating hard for your family. And
Mm,
so for lots of kids, there are instances of really enlarged tonsils or adenoids that make it hard to bite, chew, and swallow without pain or discomfort. So if you're a 2 or 3-year-old who, it hurts every time you bite or you swallow, guess what you learn to do really quickly? Like rely on yogurt squeezy pouches because
yeah.
they go down without pain. And so a lot of, eating challenges are a combination of multiple, stars aligning in a way that makes it really tricky. So other things like constipation kind of play into that. Other things like history of really tricky kind of medical stuff. Lots of our preemie babies find it really hard to start on solids when they've had a lot of medical intervention early on. Babies who have had reflux have learnt pretty early that eating can be quite uncomfortable or
Yeah.
painful. So there's a lot of the kind of physical things there. You've also got things like the temperament. So a lot of our kids who find eating more challenging are those sensitive, slow to warm, observant, cautious kids, which presents in, a park or a party situation, but also in a mealtime situation, that they're not just I'll have a go at that and whatever.
Yeah.
They do need a lot of time and space to do that. Then we've got these kids who kind of have some sensory processing difficulties, who, experience sensations in either a much bigger or much smaller way that makes it hard for them to really trust food. If you are really bothered by texture, if you think about, a punnet of blueberries, there's a chance that a few of them are going to be soft and squishy or are going to be underripe and really hard and tart. And foods that kids tend to struggle with are those fresher foods that do change all the time and are
Yeah.
really hard to trust. And so it takes a lot of exposure and, space for those kids to get to a point where they actually want to have a go at that.
Mm.
Which often coincides with later in, their childhood when they have some rational brain, because all of our little kids, like, logic is irrelevant. You can say that you liked blueberries yesterday, but I tasted this blueberry today and it was rubbish. So
Yeah.
I don't like blueberries anymore. Like, that's
Yeah.
where we're kind of, you can't talk that through with young kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for explaining that as well, because I think, yeah, so often we just focus on the fact that they're not eating the food, that we don't always look at the bigger picture and be like, oh, could it be something more? Not saying there always is, but
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah, we might need to, especially if it's something consistent, I guess, would be like, maybe
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
need to investigate this a bit further.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so another thing that I wanted to bring up as well, because I know that you've talked briefly on it as well, but things like, obviously we carry a lot of baggage ourselves as adults. We had, I always say, like, now that we know better, we can do better. And obviously our parents were doing the best at with what they knew at the time and all the rest of it. How do we kind of not let that baggage land on our children when it comes to our body images, our food hang-ups, our this, that, and everything else? Like, what are some simple things that we can do or not do
Yeah,
so that our children aren't kind of being like, getting it
absolutely.
all.
I mean, I think the first one is to really reflect on your own things. Like, what are you bringing to the table, literally and figuratively?
Mm,
How do you feel about your body? Do you want your kids to feel the same way about their body? What's been your experience of, growing up? How you feel about food? Is it an enemy? Is it something you have to control? Is it something that causes you a lot of stress? And so just being aware of, like, is that what you want to pass on or not? I think is a big first step. But then I also want to acknowledge that we can break the cycles, or we can, divert them. To be the people that are changing everything is just too big an ask. So
mm,
what we can try and do is just a bit better
yeah,
than what our parents were able to do with what they knew. And so we're kind of adding an extra part, hoping that those things that we pass on to our kids, they can pass on again to their kids in a way that was supportive. So I
yeah.
just really want to, you don't have to get it all right. There are so many bigger picture things making it challenging. The way that we see bodies now, the way that food is marketed and talked about, the programs there's a lot of
Mm,
information that is not going to agree with the things that we're saying, and our kids are going to be exposed to that. But what I want them to come back to is, like, how did my family talk about or respond to this stuff? And for me, the biggest thing really is about being as neutral as you can. So,
yeah.
really trying to give it less attention, less chat about bodies, less chat about food. If you do, it's kind of talking about things by name. It's not kind of good foods or bad foods. It's not talking about
Mm,
health. Everybody, a lot of people think that they really need to educate, teach about nutrition to their kids and what is healthy. But the things that I want them to learn come from the doing. It's not what I said about the nutrients or what I said about the food groups. It's actually like that at dinner we have vegetables on our plate is what the
mm,
norm is, rather than like vegetables are important. You have to eat them for this reason. Like, nobody actually is motivated by that in a long-term way, particularly children.
yeah.
They might be in the moment, but we're talking long-term stuff here. Like, what can they
Yeah.
take away as their kind of core beliefs? And I think one of those is very much that their body is not a problem to fix. And
Mm,
that message, unfortunately, doesn't come through really clearly.
yeah.
But in any challenge or any kind of interesting questions that are thrown up, my response is always to kind of do less talking and just remember that what I don't want to give away is this idea that I think your body is a problem to fix. And
Mm,
so that's a nice kind of guide for, like, I should think you're better saying less than trying to over explain or kind of talk through all of the things. Absolutely listen, be there, ask more information about what they're asking about. Um, but always that core belief that their body is great just as it is and it will do what it needs to do. We cannot control literally like the size of our body. We cannot, magically
mm,
change the way our legs are or how big our shoulders are or anything like that. In the same way, we can't change our kid's body. And actually, the evidence is really consistent that the more we try and restrict or control eating, the more out of control kids become and the more they tend towards binge eating. And so
yeah.
our job is really about staying in charge of the big picture stuff and
Yeah.
trusting that their body will do what it needs to do. And there are always going to be people in bigger bodies, there are always going to be people in smaller bodies. It is not up to us to choose where they fall in that kind of place. And taking a lot of that pressure off yourself means that you can just show up in a way that is not fearful or controlling or any of those things that
Yeah.
feel really uncomfortable.
Thank you. And so, for those that maybe perhaps their children are, or their teens or tweens or whatever, may be displaying signs of having some sort of food issues, whether it be restricting or whether it be going the other extreme and binging, what's what's the go there? Where can they get help? What can they be doing themselves? Because I know this is a very tricky topic, and I know it's something that as our children are getting older, they're getting exposed to more, they're forming their opinions, they might get some skewy idea and be like, oh, this is what I need to do. Like, how do we navigate that? Especially if, as a parent, we're just like, whoa, what is going on here?
Yeah.
How do we seek help for those sorts of things?
It's so hard. And like
Mm,
realistically, I think our stats are, and they're probably an underestimate, a third of Australian teens have some kind of disordered eating. So not a
mm,
full-blown eating disorder, but some interesting kind of dieting or controlling kind of behaviors around food. And so it is something that absolutely you're likely to face, boys or girls. It really
yeah,
doesn't discriminate. There are absolutely, there's the kind of skinny ideal that's going on at the moment, but there's also this kind of muscular, athletic, the strong kind of guy vibe that's, everyone's a bit obsessed again about how their body looks and what that is. Part of it, I think, is having a space where your kids can come to you and can kind of, ask things and you can respond in a way that is as neutral as you can without kind of, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Like, that's not what I do.
yeah,
But tell me more. Like, what are you thinking? What's kind of behind it? And really trying to be a bit of a safe space because kids are going to rebel. Part of their, teenage years are like pushing against what
yeah,
you've done all the time. And in those early phases where they're trying on some different things, I think one of the best things we can do is shrug it off, is actually not turn it into a you versus me, I don't think you should, you think you should kind of battle. If it gets to a point that you are worried, it's absolutely worth checking in with a health provider, like with your GP, or if you've, in that space. It's tricky though, because there are some really outdated kind of health professionals in all phases, dietitians
yeah,
included, absolutely. And I'd be wanting, the worst thing that could happen is they're like, oh, great, you're being really healthy, like, and praising this kind of,
yeah.
uncomfortable eating. So I'd really be vetting that process. And that is not easy. Like, there's not a lot of safer spaces to go. Um,
Mm,
at this point. Like there are some great eating disorder kind of clinics, even that do kind of prevention work. There are lots of non-diet dietitians who do some wonderful work in there. There's some great GPs and psychs, and absolutely, but it depends where you are, depends what you can
yeah,
access. Definitely worth checking in and getting some advice.
yeah.
And yeah, there's no easy answer to that one,
Mm,
unfortunately. And when you think about like yourself, your peers at those times, like there were
mm,
some really icky and uncomfortable
yeah,
things kind of going on. And I do think, though, the way that your family talks about food and bodies and that kind of stuff does stick with you for better or for worse. And so if
Yeah.
you can be the better, where you're not commenting on other people's bodies, where you're not praising people when they lose weight, or you're not talking about size, or they really are not hearing you talk badly about your body. Those things are all building a strong foundation. So kids can try things on often and think like, this is actually not very fun for me. I'm not going to become obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And there are still going to be times when you've done all the right things and it's still a real challenge.
Mm.
And that is absolutely a space that I would want you to get some good support.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that as well. Because, like I said, I know that even from my memories of some friends that when we were in high school, just some of the
Mhm.
things that they were doing, it was like, hmm. And I know obviously that that hasn't changed over the years.
It hasn't. And it's interesting, isn't it? I do think our kids are in some ways able to be like, that's interesting, and like not something I necessarily want to get involved in, or
Yeah.
maybe have a little attempt. I remember a period in my teen years, and I was like cutting out pictures from magazines of like people who, had this kind of body that I was looking for. And I remember having a little thing around like counting Maltesers, and like I could have five, and then like I was telling them like, I had 20. And then I remember thinking at the time, like, I actually don't really want to do this. Like, I just want to
Mm,
eat the Maltese and kind of, but those things will keep coming back. I've spent a
yeah.
lot of time battling, before I've undone a lot of that work in my own
Mm,
professional work. Sometimes, when you're exposed to that many messages from the media, it's really hard. What I want though is their core beliefs about their body coming from us to be that it's not a problem, that they are
yeah.
them, they are loved just the way they are, and that is a really, confident space to start from.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. And so I know I'm conscious of time. So how are you like what resources do you provide that can help parents if people are listening they're like, oh, I'd love to find out a little bit more about that because I know one of the things that you do share which I've seen like you often give like the kind of the tick of approval for some comparison between different things for example so which I know is quite helpful so what other things do you have that parents may
This is the great thing about working for myself, is that I just get to do the things that I think
I
people
love it.
need. And so it's really stemmed from that. So it's the kind of first part of it is the baby bit. It's really supporting people who are introducing solids who just feel really overwhelmed and want a clear kind of idea of what they can aim for and what they can
Mm,
do. That moves into like toddler meal times, which is more around navigating those fussy kind of behaviors and the kind of unpredictableness of toddler, while also embedding some of this stuff, right? With
yeah.
also now, when your kids are younger, it is a lot easier to start thinking about like, what do I think about bodies? What do I think about food? Do I have some weird things going on? Kind of unpacking some of that. And then family mealtimes is really about how we support families who are raising kids without this diet kind of culture lens, really thinking about how we can empower them, how we can, from the very start,
Yeah.
support them to trust their body and to listen to their body and feel okay in their body, but also to feel confident to start to explore food. And that's that kind of fussy eating plus body image is family mealtimes. Then school mealtimes is my kind of advocacy stuff around particularly primary schools and early childhood centers where perhaps there's some really traditional, outdated messaging going on, and
Mm,
thinking about how can we change these things up. I'm running some really great professional developments for some schools in our local area, and there's a lot of free resources on there for parents to drive change because actually when you write to your school with some suggestions about like, I've noticed this and my kid's telling me this, I'm worried about this kind of
mm.
culture that's going on here. Here are some resources. I wonder what our school could do. That has driven so much change across Australia
Oh,
because
that's great.
it's coming from the people who are experiencing it. It's not just me kind of knocking on school doors being like, could we do it a little bit differently? Like,
Yeah.
what's our options here? So there's that. And then I've got Tuesday reviews, which is like a food kind of product,
Yeah.
interestingly, on a Tuesday. Um, Comparisons and just thinking about like what is in the supermarket. Really importantly, that's not a like buy this, don't buy that. It's
Yeah.
a how can you look at something and decide if you want that for your family or not? Because there
Yeah.
is room for all foods. You can absolutely choose lots of different things. And so I'm kind of just unpacking some of that marketing, some of the weird stuff that kind of
Yeah.
goes on in kind of food industry. And then I like to do some random chit chats. I've got a masterclass next week for tricky dinners for toddlers, that real post daycare kind of 5
Oh,
to
I
7
remember those
o'clock
days.
vibe. We'll talk about that. And then a
Yeah.
really interesting chat in a couple of weeks in June, which will be recorded and available for purchase too, around these families who are having their kids measured in school, having their BMI measured, and getting this letter or this phone call to say, your kid's BMI is too high, here's a healthy eating pamphlet, and then are just left reeling, not knowing what
Yeah.
to do or where to go, or is it a problem and what's happening. And that's a really risky point
Yeah.
for kids and families to start to think, oh my gosh, I'm not doing the right thing, or what do I do? And these kind of
Mm,
tricky behaviors creep in. So I'm running that with a colleague in a couple of weeks. Just things that people need or want
yeah.
is my jam.
I
So
love that.
yeah, it's super fun because I can rant and rave about the things that I
Yeah.
love.
It's so good, is it's like, well, this is what I think.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what
Awesome.
I like. That's the greatest thing about the membership is that we have like Q&A every day. So you can ask your questions, big or small, theoretical or, practical. And so every time we're answering those questions, I'm like, oh yes, this is coming up all the time. Like this is
Mm,
something people need to know. And so
noticing the patterns.
that
Yeah.
yeah, that dialogue is so helpful to understand like what challenges are you facing? Like, oh, guess what? They're the same ones I'm facing too.
Oh,
So yeah,
I
to
love that. And I know, yeah, I'll add into the show notes all the links to all these things as well, because I know just how helpful it is. But before we finish up, is there just, if you could give one bit of advice, that was it, to the listeners, what would it be? Just one thing.
do less talking about food, less worrying about food. I know that could feel dismissive. I don't want it to feel dismissive, but I do think it's actually helpful for you and your kids to put less pressure on food, eating, all of the things. Um, so do less,
Yeah.
and then get some support. Like if you feel like I don't have a philosophy or I don't have a clear guiding light or a North Star in this kind of space, like find somebody that you do align with that you can just kind of check back in with, or they're kind of messaging difference to your own sense of confidence. And then when you come at something from a place of confidence, your kids get brought along with you. You're not second
Yeah.
guessing yourself in the moment. And that makes a huge difference.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much for joining me today.
My
I've really
pleasure.
enjoyed chatting to you and hearing about all this, and I'm sure the listeners will get as much out of it as I have. So thank you so much,
Thank
Dr. Kyla.
you. Oh, you're so welcome.